Dawn broke over King's Landing in a pale smudge, the first light snagging on the gilded domes of the Great September and turning them to dull coins. The city woke grudgingly, as if each bell peal pried open a crusted eye. Fishmongers ventured down to the river with rime on their fingers. The night soil carts creaked away. Dogs nosed among the husks and peelings in Flea Bottom. Up on Visigna's hill the wind smelled of smoke and the salt of the Blackwater. But there was something else beneath it this morning. A tautness, like the air before a storm. Eddard Stark had not slept. He had pushed a chair beside the shutter and sat with his sword across his knees, leaning his head back when his neck gave him pain, thinking of Winterfell and the sound of wind moving through the godswood as water moves through reeds. The sword was ice, old as the realm and twice as heavy as his leg felt now. When he closed his eyes, he saw the way the light struck the blade, dark and pale all at once. When he opened them, he saw the pale edges of the city and felt the weight of the day press itself upon him. He rose before the bells and dressed without a summons, took no breakfast, and walked to the window to watch the street far below. It would be better to send a page for the litter, he thought. Pride was useless where duty demanded swiftness. The leg had mended poorly since the Kingslayer's ambush in the street, and each stare was an unkindness. But he could not trust that litter-bearers paid by the city would bring him to the place he meant to go and not the one their master preferred. He could not trust anything in this city, stone or man. He rapped on his own door and it opened at once. Tommard, Big Tom, who had followed him from the snows to this hot nest, stood there with Alan behind him, both helmed and armed and solemn as if attending a funeral. "Ready?" Ned asked. "I am Lord," Tommard said. "Yoren came as you sent. He's in the yard with 2 boys and a donkey that has more sense than both." "Yoren," Ned drew a breath. "Send him up." Yoren filled the doorway much as a black tree might, gnarled and rough and smelling of rain. His hair was a tangle, his face a map carved in knots. He spat into the rushes and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand as if he had come from a long way and put little store by courtesies. "You've a hard look," the Black Brother said. "Harder than when last we spoke." "Weather'll do that to a man," Ned said. "You'll see Arya in the yard when we go. Get her to safety. If the city turns." "Aye," Yoren said. "And the other? The Lady Sansa? She'll be with the Queen. She will not come." Ned had wrestled with that truth until it had left him too tired to argue with shadows. Sansa's heart had turned its soft face toward a golden crown, and he could not pry it back by words alone. "I'll take the one who will," Yoren said. "What's this I hear of you and the Sept?" Ned did not answer that. He did not like to speak a thing before the first step had been taken lest words wear it thin. He sent Yoren away and took up his cane and ice and went to meet the day. They bore him down the steps of the Tower of the Hand in a short litter at last. Tommard and Alan would not have it otherwise, and out into the yard where the breath of the city lifted the hair from his brow. The sky was scoured to palest blue above the red keep. The banners hung limp as spent tongues. He rode no horse and had no dais. A lord walking to the Great September with a sword across his knees and a limp to mark him drew eyes enough. By the time he reached the gates of the castle, the column had thickened behind him. Golden cloaks with Yano Slint at their head, smiling his pig's smile. The white cloaks of the Kingsguard, the household servitors and cupbearers, courtiers who lived on the edge of other men's breath. Varys came as well, soft as a cat as ever, and Littlefinger's laughter was a bright pin in the ear. "You look solemn, my Lord Hand," Peter Baelish said as they came abreast. "Have you decided at last to smile for the city? Let them see your pretty Northman's teeth." "If I smile today, Lord Baelish," Ned said, "it will not be for want of reason." They left the castle like a river that had burst its banks and poured down Aegon's high hill in a broad froth of silk and steel. Plebeians kept to the sides of the street and peered over each other's shoulders. Sellers of sweet wine and candied almonds trundled beside them in the hope a great man's thirst might craft a great man's coin. Children ran ahead until a gold cloak cuffed one and the rest scattered like sparrows. The bells began as they neared the foot of the hill. First 1, then 3, then 7, the sound overlapping until it was a constant shiver in the air. Ned felt each peal in his bones. The plaza before the great September of Baylor spread wide as the belly of a king. Pigeons flew up from the steps when the column pressed forward. The first faithful had gathered in small knots, and the sight of the hand carried and multiplied and drew more out of alleys and doorways. The sept's white marble shone in the thin light like frost on a grave. The High Septon had sent word that he would hear petitions at the first hour. He was not a man to rise earlier than his girth demanded. Ned had no appetite to petition. He climbed the stairs slowly, pausing only once. When he turned at last, the plaza was nearly full. Janos Slint flared his cloak as if it were a bird of prey. "My lord Hand," he said in a voice that carried. "If this is a procession, we should have musicians. The small folk love a tune to drown their bellies." "It is not a procession," Ned said. He raised ice with both hands and set it before him, point down against the step. The blade looked like a piece of night thrust into the day, and even the pigeons seemed to hold their breath. "It is a summons. I summon the queen. I summon the boy who calls himself king. I summon the white cloaks sworn to the king's protection. And I summon the gods." He looked across the heads of the crowd to where the red keep stood in red stone and suspicion. "Send for them," he told Janos Slint, "and send for the High Septon." "Bold," Littlefinger murmured, "as a chicken at a wedding feast." Varys said nothing, only his eyes moved, taking in the faces, the loose stones, the way the plaza narrowed between two buildings to a passage that led into a tangle of streets. Ned did not watch Varys long. He did not like to be seen watching Varys. When the Queen's party came at last, the city drew a breath and held it. The Lannister red moved through the crowd like blood through sand. Cersei wore it over gold, and gold again at her throat and ears, and gold in her hair, fine as the dust in a sunbeam. Joffrey had a sword at his hip and a fretful mouth that wanted to be cruel and was too young to look anything but uncertain. Behind them came the Kingsguard in their white cloaks and enameled helms. Ser Boros Blunt, thick-necked and damp. Ser Meryn Trant with his eyes like old meat. Ser Aerys Oakhart, young and grave. Ser Mandon Moore with his face blank as a mask. Ser Preston Greenfield, polished clean. And last of all Ser Barristan Selmy, the White Bull. Jaime Lannister was not among them, no more than his shadow was. Sandor Clegane walked with them but apart, helm beneath his arm, scars bared as if he would challenge the sun. The High Septon thrust his bulk through the sept doors like a cork through a narrow bottle and rested a hand on a novice as on a wall. He wiped his upper lip and tried to look as if he had been considering weighty scripture rather than porridge. His small eyes were already calculating lanes through the day's inconvenience. "My lord Hand," he wheezed, "your summons is unusual." "The crimes are unusual," Ned said. He felt the plaza gather itself on the balls of its feet. He felt the 7 heads of the sept blaze above him as if lit with anger. "I have laid my charges. The late king's children are not his. They are seed of the queen and her brother, twined in sin. The realm is defrauded. I demand justice under the gods. I demand trial by combat, trial by 7, before the 7 who are one, as our law permits." A murmur ran outward like ripples from a thrown stone. The words were old words. The kind men remembered after forgetting their fathers' faces. Trials by 7 belonged to songs and very old men's stories. Ashford Meadow had not yet sunk from the speech of common people, even in a city that ate its old tales. The High Septon's mouth fell open, and he shut it again with visible effort. Cersei made as if to laugh and found no laughter. "You would drag the faith into your northern lies?" Her voice was smooth as milk that had stood too long. "You would spill blood on the father's stones to make a show, Stark?" "The faith made these stones to bear truth," Ned said. "If the gods favor you, they will. If they favor the realm, they will." Joffrey shoved his jaw forward. "I am the king," he said, too loud. "I need no gods and no trials to prove it, northern dog. Seize him." The plaza swallowed and blew that out as chaff. None of the gold cloaks moved. Ned could see Janos Slint's eyes flicking, counting, weighing, scenting the crowd's mood as a dog scents a bitch. Littlefinger was smiling in a way that showed none of his teeth. Varys looked suddenly very tired. "Your Grace," the High Septon said, turning his head with a slowness that looked like piety and was only fat. The law, such as it is, such as we have inherited, allows for this when the faith is offended. The hand has laid grave charges of incest, of deception touching the sanctity of marriage as the seven blessed. A trial by seven is rare. It is also lawful. Cersei recoiled as if from a chamber pot. You will not. In the sight of the seven, the fat man said, and his small eyes were quick for once and not slow. There were a great many people looking at him, a very great many. In the sight of the seven, with their leave and blessing, yes. Joffrey looked to his mother and then to Barristan Selmy and found no refuge in either face. He saw only expectation pressed upon him like a too tight helm. He set his jaw again. Then let it be done, he said. I'll see him die for it. Perhaps, Ned said. Perhaps not. Pain lanced his leg and he did not shift it. He addressed the High Septon. The accused must choose 7 champions to prove his innocence. I will choose 7 to prove his guilt. The High Septon lifted his hands. The mother's tears and the father's sternness be upon us. This day we will stand before the 7 and ask them to judge. And then the day began to turn. They gave them hours to name their champions. Fewer than some would have preferred, more than some feared. The plaza hummed and sweltered. Wine cellars did well. The men who carried stools did better. Messengers ran like rabbits between Red Keep and Sept, and more than one highborn lady was carried out fainting to the shade. Word of the trial rolled through the city as if someone had thrown a pot of oil upon a cook fire. The fishermen on the river left their lines to the gulls and came up with their nets slung around their shoulders. The smiths left their forges to roar until an apprentice remembered to bank them. The mummers and whores came because this would be better theater than any of them could sell for coin. Ned took himself to a corner where the Sept's shadow blackened on a strip of sunlit marble. He sat and set ice beside him and let the sword's presence be known. The cold bit through his palm and stilled the tremors of his leg. Tomard stood close. Alan spoke little, but his eyes never stopped. He thought of calling for Robb across the 1,000 leagues between them as a man calls for water in a dream, and he swallowed the dryness down. I will stand, Ser Barristan Selmy said. Ned had not seen him approach. The white bull's hair was as white as new snow. His face, more weathered than the longest road. He did not touch his sword as he spoke. He did not need to. It was understood. You are sworn to the king, Ned said. I am sworn to the king, Barristan said. Which king is the question? If the gods decide today that the boy is the king, I will have broken no oath in standing now. If the gods decide he is not, he let the words trail. Cersei's eyes had been on Barristan since the words trial by 7. Ned had felt them. She would try to keep him. She would try to sweeten him like wine that has long since turned. Watching Barristan now, Ned saw a man peeling honor away from fear in small careful strips. You know the truth, Ned said softly. I know that we used to, Barristan said. I will stand, if you will have me. Ned inclined his head. He felt something in his chest ease. Renly Baratheon came next in a slash of green silk and a smell of oranges. He had shaved too closely and cut himself near the line of his jaw. Loras Tyrell walked at his shoulder, all perfect curls and velvet and a face that made girls lean out of upper windows in a way that made their mothers slap at their fingers. Renly's smile was bright and not quite steady. You take a mighty risk, he said without preamble. So do you, Ned said. Renly's eyes went to the Sept doors and then back. I once told you to move quickly, to take the boy and his mother and choke the city in a fist of iron. You would not. Now you will let fate and steel do the seizing for you. It may be the better play. I am not playing, Ned said. Then you are the only man in this city today who is not. Renly looked to Loras. The gods will not mind if the flower of the Reach blooms in their service. I will stand, Loras said at once, and some girl in the crowd dropped her cup because her fingers forgot to hold it. Have you asked your Lord Father? Ned said. Loras smiled, which sat on him like sunlight. My father is at High Garden, he said, and I am here. Then stand, Ned told him. But understand what you stand upon. Loras's eyes went to Joffrey where he leaned on the balustrade under his mother's shielding hand. I understand, he said. Ser Balon Swan approached without heraldry. His surcoat plain, his jaw unremarkable, his hands square. There was something about his presence that the crowd did not notice and did not know they had not noticed. Ned had seen men like that before. When they drew their swords, you always found yourself wondering, after, why you had not watched them a moment longer. I am of the marches and the storm, Balon said. But this is a matter of law. I will stand for the law. Ned accepted him with a nod. Beric Dondarrion came with the Red Priest in his wake, and Thuris's breath already smelled faintly of wine and wildfire. You sent me to bring the mountain to the king's justice, Beric said, his eye steady. You will have my sword to bring this justice to the king. The father frowns upon falsehood, Thuris intoned with a relish that made the High Septon twitch, and the warrior lends his arm to any who have the courage to ask. I have been to a great many trials, Lord Stark, but few that suited me half so well. My poor sword longs for a proper blessing. His grin was wicked as a boy's. You may find another trial waiting for you if you set your sword afire in the mother's sight, the High Septon said, waddling nearer. Sweat stood on his lip like dew on a fleshy fruit. This is a holy place. The Lord of Light burns everywhere, Thuris said cheerfully. But if you wish, I shall light it elsewhere and bring it back. You won't light it at all, Ned said. You will stand as you are. Thuris's grin faded by a thumb's width. As I am, then. Syrio Farrell came last and did not ask for permission. He parted a fringe of gawkers with a sideways sway that made him seem boneless, and when he reached Ned, he inclined his head the smallest shade. Today you are water in a storm, he said. You move all those around you. The girl is with the Black Brother, safe for this day. I stand. You are not of the faith, the High Septon sputtered anew. I am of the sea, Syrio said, showing perfect teeth that had not seen the songs of the Seven and did not miss them. And the sea hears all prayers. That makes 7, Ned said, himself not counted. For he would not fight with the leg as it was, nor trust the city to prosper if its hand lay bleeding on the stones. The accuser need not fight at Ashford, he remembered. The accused had fought that day because he had been proud and a prince. Pride would kill them here. There was enough of it around to drown the square. That makes 7. Cersei saw them assembled and set her jaw in a mirror of her sons. She named her champions with a voice pitched to carry, a litany of white and iron. Ser Boros Blount, Ser Merin Trant, Ser Mandon Moor, Ser Ari Soakert, Ser Preston Greenfull. The King's Guard stand for their king. She looked past Barristan without looking at him. Sandor Clegane. The hound's head rolled on his neck once, amused and not. Ser Elin Payne. The King's Justice walked forward with a great sword on his shoulder and silence trailing him like a cloak. Barristan Selmy removed his white cloak as a man might unbuckle a burden. He folded it carefully and placed it over Tomard's arms. Ser Barristan, Cersei said, voice taking on a crack it had not had since she learned to speak. You will remember your place. I have remembered nothing else for 40 years, Barristan replied, so softly that only those nearest heard. The High Septon raised his hands and the bells hammered once, twice, thrice. A ring had been marked on the plaza with chalk and blood and the ashes of 3 old votive candles. A sanded pole had been laid across the steps to keep back the press. 7 novices stood along it like poorly shaped statues, and behind them a score of brown-robed mendicants murmured a prayer that sounded like bees. The air carried heat like a hand. A fly landed on Ned's cheek and he brushed it away and told his leg to be a leg and not a stone. The 7 see, the High Septon called. They see the truth as the Father sees it, loves as the Mother loves, judges as the crone judges. Let the warrior strengthen the arm of the just. Let the smith give his good hammer to break unrighteousness. Let the maiden's purity wash us clean. Let the stranger turn his face from us. He lifted a fat hand. Begin. It began as all melees begin, with a sudden stupidity. Meryn Trant charged Loras Tyrell with his shield up and his sword cutting downward in a hack any boy would have read 3 moves before, and Loras knocked it aside with contempt and flicked his blade toward Meryn's gorget like a man opening a letter. The steel rasped but did not find soft flesh. Meryn was clamped into his metal like a crab, and his breath sounded like bellows. He turned to make it strength against speed, and for a moment it looked as if he might do it. Then Syrio flowed in from the side where he had no right to be, and Meryn found he was fighting 2 men in 2 ways. Ser Island Payne went straight for Barristan with that greatsword that had slit the air above Eddard's father and brother long years ago, and Ned felt his stomach climb to his throat before he forced it back down with iron fingers. They met with the sound of ringing coins, 1 light, 1 heavy. Barristan had a way of turning just after a blow landed, as if he were bending with a reed that grew from the middle of his spine. Island had a way of driving straight through anything that stood before him as if it were rotten wood. Steel glanced and skated. Sparks leaped. Barristan took a line along his forearm and ignored the blood. Sandor Clegane and Loras came together at last like 2 stags in a winter field. Loras's horse had been led away. This would be footwork, and he welcomed it. Sandor welcomed nothing. He fought as a man who hated the world and knew the world deserved it. His sword cut at Loras's thigh. Loras slid aside. Loras's riposte made a chime against Sandor's pauldron. They were too well matched for a show. There was only the grind and grating of honest labor there, and both of them understood it. Balon Swan met Ares Oakhart with the quiet courtesy of men who might have shared a cup together while rain came down, and their blades did everything words would have done and said more besides. There was no hatred in it, only a careful attention to each other's intent, and that made it dangerous. Ser Ares had youth and the patience of a man who had never learned to show off. Balon had that unremarkable quality which made you dead if you mistook it for dullness. Within 3 passes Balon had Ares thinking, within 10 sweating. Mandon Moore slid toward Beric Dondarrion with eyes that showed nothing. There was something about the way Mandon moved that made you wish to look elsewhere. He was the absence of a man rather than a man. Beric had old fire to him and a scar along his jaw that flared pink when he fought. He flicked his blade forward and Mandon swallowed it in a parry that did not exist until it did. Their swords clashed low, high, low again, in the form of a call and response that would end in death if prayer did. Thuras of Myr advanced upon Preston Greenfield, grinning, and then, without warning, threw his arms wide and shouted a word in his harsh tongue that made 3 old women cross themselves and the High Septon nearly choke on his tongue. He did not light the sword. He only laughed and leaped, and Preston went from practiced disdain to astonishment to rage in the length of 1 heartbeat. His blade came down like a gate. Thuras ducked and tossed sand. The plaza did not have much sand. Thuras found what there was. Boros Blunt lumbered at Renly. This was an ungainly thing. Renly had strength and a good cut and the grace of a young stag, but he was not the equal of the others in craft, and Boros had bulk and a helmet strapped tightened too far and a stubbornness like a boar's. He swung and Renly parried clumsily. Renly's countercut would have taken the ear off a less cautious man. They circled and clanged and sweated like good iron in a bad forge. Ned stood with ice like a dark flag beside him and drank each movement with his eyes. The world had narrowed to a ring, and the ring had narrowed to 7 fights that were each the same fight. The crowd's roar rose and fell as if the city were drawing breath around a wound. Meryn Trant overreached. Syrio did not. A simple truth, and that was the end of it. The Bravosi's sword kissed the tiny gap where gorget met helm, and the kiss found flesh. Meryn's mouth opened but made no sound. He went to his knees as if they had always wished to be nearer the earth, and the sight of him kneeling broke something thick and ugly in the plaza. People began to shout things that had names and targets. Syrio stepped back lightly, not even breathless. "Just so," he said to Loras, and the young knight's answering smile had a flash of boy in it still. Barristan and Island were a slow grinding spar whose music no one else had the right to hear. The King's Justice's greatsword came in a cut that would have split an ox to its shoulders, and Barristan let it slide past with a mastery that was almost cruel and drew blood from Island's hip with a short, mean thrust. Blood made the stones slick where Island stepped. He did not slow. He turned and pressed. Barristan's parry rang like a bell. He did not yield ground. Sandor Clegane tasted his own sweat and hated the taste. He drove Loras back with a sequence of blows that said, "You are a child, and I have seen worse things than you will ever dream." Loras gave way, and his boot scraped the chalk of the ring. Sandor felt the heat of the day and something else, a different heat, licking across his memory. Thuris's voice rose somewhere, bright and ugly with delight. "Come then, pretty." The word reached Sandor and brought other memories with it, and he looked with the corner of his eye and saw Thuris's sword blaze at last. No, not blaze, glimmer. The merman had tricked them. He had not lit it. But the thought had already been a spark in the tinder of Sandor's mind, and he had to tear his eyes back to Loras and the bright, bright sun. Balan fainted high and took Ares under the arm as the white cloak's guard shivered. It was not a deep wound, but it was clean, and clean wounds matter. He followed with a twist that forced Ares to choose between his sword arm and his ribs. Ares chose to keep his arm. His ribs paid. He staggered 3 steps and nearly went down, but righted himself and looked at Balan with sudden, furious respect. They bowed very slightly, ridiculous and perfect, and went on. Mandon Moore found Barrack's guard once and again and clipped it both times like a man clipping a hawk's wings with shears. Barrack laughed to show he was not worried and spat blood to show he had work to do. The second time Mandon cut deep enough that the laughter took longer to return. "Gods take your face," Barrack said cheerfully. Mandon said nothing. His face took the wish as its due. Preston Greenfield broke from safe measures and went wild after Thuras scored his cheek with a cut that was more insult than hurt, and Thuras delighted in him as a cat delights in a beetle turned on its back. There was no dignity in it, which made a great many men in the crowd happier than seeing dignity would have. Preston's blade bit Thuras's sleeve and drew skin. Thuras hooped and leaped away again. "I'm bleeding for the 7, he cried. "Look, bless me." 3 mendicants did in a panic. Boros Blunt fell into the habit that had served him all his life. He planted his feet and tried to simply be more than the man before him. This worked very well against kitchens and servants' corridors and wine and a 20-year appetite. It worked not at all against a Baratheon with something to prove in front of a Tyrell who made his heart move like a tide. Renly set his shield and chained 3 good strikes together and a 4th that was not sensible but was decisive. And Boros made a sound that was not a word and went to one knee. Renly hesitated as men do who have seen boars behave strangely after being stabbed. The hesitation cost him. Boros lunged with his weight behind a clumsy cut and took Renly across the thigh. Blood spilled warmly. Renly made a high, embarrassed sound and brought his sword down on Boros's shoulder with a strength that surprised them both. Boros's eyes rolled. He did not rise. "That's one for the Oaks," Loras said through his teeth when he saw Renly stagger. Then he took Sandor's next strike on the rim of his shield and felt it up his arm to the socket. And there was no breath to say anything more. It would have been a good day to die, Ned thought, if he had come here to die. The air tasted of salt and dust and something else that wanted to be clean and was not. He felt the city's hunger the way a man feels a hound circling just out of sight. He looked up at Joffrey and saw the boy's face folded into a look he thought might be kingship. He looked at Cersei and saw a mask that was starting to slip. He looked at Janos Slint and saw a man adding men to either side as if that would tilt a god's balance. Ser Island's blade came from high. Barristan stepped inside it and cut along the justice's wrist. The great sword clanged to the stones and bounced. Island lunged for it with a speed that surprised no one who knew how often he had wielded it. Barristan did not let him reach it. He put his own sword flat and struck Island just above the knee with the pommel and then cut him again, shallow but angry. Island's mouth opened. There was no sound. He went to one knee in an echo of Boros Blunt and then further. The stranger turned his face toward him or did not. Either way, Island's eyes suddenly looked at nothing. Barristan Selmy stood over him for a beat that was clean and still. Then he stepped back and let the justice fall. On the far side of the ring, Sandor's breath was coming as if it were fighting him. The sun had climbed and turned the air to glass. Thuras, seeing an audience, popped a cork between his teeth and spat it out and tipped his skin to his lips and then poured a little over his blade just to make it hiss. It did not flame. It hissed. The hound, who had seen worse, saw the thing he had seen before and something nodded at the base of his skull. Loras took him on his blind side without meaning to. Sandor flinched to the wrong direction and caught a cut across the jaw. He snarled like a dog and then, startling himself, he backed away. "You yield," Loras said, astonished into courtesy. Sandor's blade wavered. He looked at the black square of the Sep's open door and the black squares of memory. He looked at Joffrey, who was watching with the eager contempt of a boy for a dog that had gone lame. He looked back at Loras. "Fuck your yield," he said hoarsely. But his feet moved the way a man's feet move when the sea is coming and there is nothing to do but seek higher stones. He went out of the ring. A sound rose then that was not cheering and not booing. It was a sound cities make when they see a thing they have always believed was immovable move. Ares' oak heart slipped on his own blood and Balon Swan's sword kissed his helm and made his head ring. He reeled and put up his blade and Balon knocked it aside and brought his guard down along Ares' wrist. The white cloak clutched at the cut and went to one knee because he had no choice. Balon could have killed him then. He did not. He struck him lightly on the back of the helm with the flat and stepped away. Ares lowered his sword and put his hand open on the stones. He was not the kind to throw away his life for a pride he did not have. "I yield," he said. Mandon Moore and Beric Dondarrion still fought in a pocket of heat that had become its own world. Mandon's blade was tireless and impersonal. Beric bled from two places and smiled to show he did not mind and ceased to smile when it began to cost him. He tried a feint that had worked in 7 counties and 3 tourneys and found it withered in the air before Mandon's refusal to acknowledge its existence. He took a cut across his ribs that was too close to the heart for anyone's comfort. Thuras saw it, and his face, merry as a summer boy's, went briefly old. He shouted something hoarse that did not belong to the 7, and Beric brought his sword around in a cut from nowhere that took Mandon along the mouth and left his lips red with what did not want to be there. For the first time since the ring had been chalked, Mandon's face showed him to be a man. His eyes widened the smallest measure. Beric pressed and pressed again. Mandon stepped into him as a man steps into rain. Their blades locked. They stood like that for a long breath. Then Mandon broke it and Beric struck him over the ear with a pommel that had no poetry in it and Mandon went down. Preston Greenfield was the next to fall and he fell badly. In the end Thuras simply got bored with playing and took him with a cut that bit where Gorget met shoulder. Thuras panted and laughed and then sat down on the edge of the chalk and began to hum, because there was no champion in front of him for the moment and his legs had decided to behave like legs again rather than springs. Renly and Boros had become a farce and then ceased to be one when Boros missed badly and Renly struck him over the neck and made a sound like a melon being split. Blood went everywhere. Renly stood swaying, his thigh streaming, his eyes wide as a boy's after his first true kill. Loras was there in an instant, his hand on Renly's arm. "It is enough," he said. "It is enough." It was enough. The Lannister side had 3 men down and 2 yielded and 1 fled. Only Meryn lay still and straighter than a man ought to lie unless something had gone from him forever. Barristan had taken 2 steps away from Island Pain and would not go further. He stood as if to hold the line between past and present by his own shape alone. A finger's worth of blackness had returned to his hair with sweat. The plaza was a scream contained within a mouth. The High Septon's voice cracked when he tried to make it heard over the crowd, and then grew to a roar which surprised everyone, himself most of all. "The gods judge," he cried, thumping his staff. "The Father judges. The crone has seen. They have shown us." He turned his small eyes to Cersei and her son. He had smelled which way the wind blew and decided to become the wind. The boy is not the king. The realm is deceived. The 7 have shown us. Cersei's face did not change. Could not. There were too many eyes upon it and too many years behind it. Only her hand tightened on Joffrey's shoulder. The boy's lips peeled back from his teeth. "Seize him," he yelled, and his voice broke on the word into a man's and a child's at once. "Seize the traitor. Kill him." Janos Slynt had his moment then, the one he had weighed in his fat little scales. He thrust an arm up. The gold cloaks surged forward to obey the boy, to obey the city that had fed them all their lives, to obey the man whose purse lined their wives' bellies. They sought to seize Ned. They did not get far. Barristan Selmy moved in a way that no man his age had any business moving. He raised a hand and his white sword sang, and a gold cloak spear became two shorter spears, and one man's courage cut itself in half. Loras Tyrell was at his side, and Balon Swan and Thuras and Beric bleeding, and Syrio was everywhere a gold cloak thought he would be and then nowhere. Tomard and Allen took a half step forward, and the edge of the plaza turned from stone to teeth. The small folk had no love for gold cloaks. They grabbed them by their ankles and shoulders and pulled. They pelted them with cabbage cores and stones with surprising accuracy. They bit. Men who had always been brave when standing behind a badge found their courage did not extend to facing a city with its hands bare and its mouth open. Varys vanished like steam. Littlefinger did not vanish but slid sideways in the confusion like a man moving behind a tapestry doorway. The High Septon planted his staff and made a face that suggested a man accustomed to ordering out the soup had discovered someone had added pepper. Joffrey tried to pull free of his mother to better howl, and Cersei did not let him. For an instant she looked very young. Then the mask returned and she drew the boy to the sept doors, calling for the white cloaks who could still stand and the hound who would not come. Ser Ares Oakhart limped to her aid because he was that kind of man. Mandon Moore rose, his face wet, and went as a shadow goes with the sun's turning. Sandor had put his helm on and was gone into the crowd like a wolf into tall reeds. Ser Island Payne lay where he had fallen, his silence heavier than iron. Ned did not pursue the queen. He did not command others to. He knew that Hunt would carry them into red stone and trap and betrayal, and the gods who had just thrown their weight onto the scale would look poorly on seeing their judgment overthrown for want of patience. He stood as the gold cloaks broke and fled to the edges of the square, and their masters judged the wind anew and decided for a time to be trees. The bells rang. Nobody had told them to stop, and they had become excited. The sound turned the city's bones to glass. When the plaza sighed and lowered itself and remembered to breathe, Ned felt the weight of his sword in his hand and the ache in his leg like a bellows that had done more work than its leather could bear. He looked up at the sept's 7 carved faces and saw nothing but stone. He looked down at Meryn Trant's body, and for a moment it was as if Jory lay there. That was not true. Jory had smiled with his eyes as he fought. Meryn had never smiled for anything but cruelty. Ned bent very slowly and put his hand flat on the stone. It was warm. He had expected it to be cold. Renly's hand closed on his arm, and he looked up and saw in the younger man's face a war that would soon be fought and would not end on a square of white marble in the city's heart. "You have won a day," Renly said. "Not the crown." "I did not seek it," Ned said. "No," Renly said, "but crowns go looking for men like you, and men like me. Then take care you see them before they arrive," Ned said. Renly's mouth twisted and then smoothed. Loras stood a little way off. His hand pressed hard on Renly's thigh to staunch the blood, his eyes overbright. He looked at Ned as if Ned were a cliff and he a small boat that had come too near in a wind he did not control. Balon Swan stood with his sword at rest and a look of someone making a list. Beric wrapped a strip of cleanish linen around his ribs and said something that made Thuras laugh again. The merman had gone quiet. He had set his sword across his knees and was looking at his hands as if they were new. The High Septon came puffing. He had 3 novices and a trail of gods' wives behind him like small birds following a large one. "It is decided," he said. "It is decided. The faith has declared. The boy is forsworn of the crown. The realm is defrauded. We shall take him into holy custody until such time as..." He swayed a little. There was more law than he could carry. Varys would have given him a script. Varys had gone. "You will not touch him," Cersei said from the sept steps. She had found herself again. A ring of white cloaks stood about her like pale teeth. Mandon's lip bled into his own mouth. Ares had bound his arm with a strip from his cloak. Preston had his hand on his cut and a face like a child punished. Joffrey had dried his eyes, and that was the most dangerous thing that had happened all day. "The gods judge," the High Septon said with sudden authority, as if he had found his staff and realized it would hold him. "Unless the queen sets herself above the gods." "I set my children above everything," Cersei said, and for a heartbeat the truth of that was a blade that glinted and drew blood from the day. "Call your gods. Call them until your throat breaks. We will be in the Red Keep." She turned and swept her son away. The white cloaks went with her. Their number diminished, their steps measured. The hound did not come. The city closed around them and parted before them. In this, as in all things, the city knew when to bow and when to bite. "Hold," Ned said to men whose hands were already reaching for spear and bow and rope. "Hold." He said it to the plaza, to the bells, to the day. He sent Tomard and Allen with Beric and Thuras to put their men in order, such as they were. He sent Balon Swan to the city watch's barracks with letters of dismissal for Janos Slint bearing the seals of hand and faith, and a promise that gold cloaks who held to the law would be paid their wages from the hand's purse until the king's treasury saw reason. He sent Loras to the Red Keep with Renly to fetch from their chambers what they wished to have if a siege made going back foolish. He sent Yoren away with Arya sooner than he had planned, sooner than his heart knew how to bear, and he did not watch them go. He took Ser Barristan Selmy aside, and together they spoke in a low voice that still carried the sound of swords struck true. "You have made an enemy of a queen," Ned said. "I have made enemies enough for 3 lifetimes," Barristan replied. Then he looked at the Red Keep and at the Sept and at the ring of white chalk and at Island Payne's fallen sword. "ND friends for half of one. I will need a Lord Commander of the Kingsguard," Ned said. Feeling as if the words were stones he lifted and placed, building something that might hold or might topple. "If the boy is not the king, another is. The Kingsguard serve the king." "Who is the king?" Barristan asked. "By law, Stannis Baratheon," Ned said. He had not intended to say it here in the open air, but the day was open like a wound. Bandages did no good until you pressed them where they belonged. "I have written to him already. He will come or he will not. Either way, the city must not eat itself before he tries to sit it." "Stannis," Barristan said. He said the name without love or dislike, as a man names weather. "He is hard, but hard can be true. Hard may be what we need," Ned said. Barristan looked at him very steadily. "There will be blood on the steps before the moon is high," he said. "Make a plan even now to wash it off." Ned did. He sent word to the Guildhall of the Alchemists, to the Harbor Master, to the armory in the Tower of the Hand. He spoke to the captains of the Household Guard. He had them swear again before the Sept steps where the gods had shown their judgment and before the city that had seen it. He spoke to a thin man with a thick ledger who had a smile like a shiv. He spoke to a woman who knew every alley on the Street of Silk. He spoke to a boy with a basket whose eyes were older than his years. He bought bread. He bought water. He bought time. By afternoon, the sky turned the color of old parchment. The Red Keep throbbing on the hill looked smaller than it had in the morning, as if the day had plucked at it and taken something away. The Queen's banners still flew. The king who was not a king sulked and screamed by turns, and sometimes the screams were heard even at the September. The white cloaks stood to arms. The gold cloaks gathered in knots and argued. In flea-bottom men stood on barrels and proclaimed the end of one age and the beginning of another, and in silk street girls laid down their ribbons and prayed in their small ways that did not involve bending their knees much. Near dusk Varys returned. He came out of a shadow like a moth from a sleeve. "My lord Hand," he said, wringing his hands, "you have made a sword of the city today. Swords cut both ways." "Are you here to be cut?" Ned asked wearily. "I am here to be of use," Varys said. "For a price." Ned shook his head. "The price I can pay you is not a coin you value. Speak." "The city watch will not hold," Varys said in a voice that would have been patient with a child or a king. "You have given them coin in one hand, which they like, and taken promises from them with the other, which they dislike. Janos Slint will sell them a different promise before the moon is up." "I have dismissed him," Ned said, "by the power of the hand." Varys smiled sadness. There is the law and there is the habit. The habit of obeying the hand is not what it once was. Janos has been in the habit of being obeyed for some time. And there are men whose wives you have not paid coin to and whose bellies you have not lined. What do you suggest? Ned asked. That you make the watch irrelevant, Varys said. Put the Red Keep under the Faith's guard. They have no swords, my lord hand, but they have something sharper, the eyes and the tongues of a city that thinks the gods have spoken. Make the Faith the city's conscience. Then appoint a commander of your own to the gold cloaks. Choose a man who has eaten with them and bled with them. Not a great lord. The city does not care for great lords. Let him say that he answers to the hand because the hand answers to the gods. They will not argue the point tonight. And tomorrow? Ned said. Tomorrow the price changes, Varys said. But by what is on offer today? Ned disliked being led to a place he had already decided he should go. It made him slow to nod. When he did, Varys's shoulders dropped, as if he had been holding a weight he was glad to put down. The eunuch brought him the name of a captain with a nose broken twice and a ring on his thumb that had cost him 3 months' wages because it reminded him of a girl who had died. Ned sent for the man and found him as Varys had said. Sound where it mattered, weak where it did not. He made him commander. The gold cloaks grumbled and squared their shoulders and decided to see whether this new wind would blow long enough to turn the mills. After full dark, Lord Peter found Ned where he sat beneath the shadow of the sept and offered him wine. Ned did not drink it. You have a talent for making friends, Littlefinger said lightly. The small folk, the Faith, the eunuch. If you can only pull the iron bank into your bed, we will all be warm. Why are you here? Ned asked. To give you a last lesson, Littlefinger said. This city is an eel. You have caught it by the head. That is bold. But an eel is mostly tail. The tail will thrash its way out of your hands while you congratulate yourself on your grip. Thank you, Ned said. I will fetch a basket. Littlefinger smiled and bowed and went away as if he had delivered a gift that would ripen on its own. In the moon's rising, the Red Keep tried its strength against the city. Janos Slint led a thrust of gold cloaks over the Street of Sisters and up toward the sept to seize the hand in the god's very shadow. They came like a river, and the city tried to be stone. It worked. The river broke around the stone and ran away. Men left their spears in the marble as they fled. They had not meant to die for a fat man's purse. Cersei tried words. She sent Pycelle with smooth phrases and the smell of old vellum to say that the Queen's household would accept the Faith's judgment while it was considered in full by the Council and the Lords Paramount. But until then, Henry, Pycelle stumbled and coughed and corrected to Joffrey, would remain in the Red Keep, where the god's judgment could be most conveniently respected by absenteeing itself. The High Septon flared with indignation like a wet lantern with too much wick and said many things about the gods and their wishes that had more to do with the plaza's mood than doctrine. Ned answered for him because doctrine and mood both served the same end. The boy is in no danger if he is not king, he said. If he is king, he is in no danger either unless he tries to be. Pycelle blinked. He had not expected sense. He withdrew and promised messages. At midnight, when the city wears strangers' faces and men see what is not there, there was a whisper at Ned's shoulder and Arya's small hands were in his. He had not meant to see her again before the road took her. Yoren stood in the shadow like a black tree with the moon behind it. She wanted to say farewell, Yoren said. Ned knelt and his leg sent up a complaint and he ignored it because he would have knelt if his bones were iron. Arya smelled of horse and sweat and the faintness of onions someone had eaten nearby. Her eyes were too big in her small face. You must be as quick as water, Ned told her, because it seemed like a thing that might save a life. Do not stop. Do not look back. I won't, she said quickly, and he knew she would and he knew she must not. Are you coming? I will follow, he lied, because fathers tell lies to spare children and gods forgive them for it. I will be behind you. Keep to the road until you find the next road, Yoren said. She will keep. I know, Ned said, which was not knowing. He looked at her and the square of chalk that had turned men into dead men, and the sept and the moon, and thought of Catelyn and Robb and Bran and Rickon and the sound that the wind made when it met the trees of the north. He put his hand on Arya's hair, and it felt like a thing he would not touch again. Go! She went. Yoren went. He watched the place where they had been until it was only night again. Before morning he sent ravens, to White Harbor and to the Eyrie, to Riverrun and Old Town and Storm's End, and another to Dragonstone with words that would burn themselves into Stannis Baratheon's mind as into oak. He wrote like a man stacking stones in a circle to keep a fire where it belonged. Some stones would shift. Fires leapt. He wrote anyway. When he laid the last quill aside, Ser Barristan was beside him in the dawn's gray. The old knight's armor looked as if it had been worn by a younger man and altered to fit him. There were dents in it that were not polished away but had been made very clean. They will try again, he said. Of course, Ned said. They will send a man with a smiling mouth, Barristan said. He will ask you to talk in a place where there are curtains. Do not. I will not, Ned said. They will offer you your daughter back, Barristan said quietly. Do not let them have you. The light at the horizon opened like a wound and bled gold. The bells began again, dutiful as old men at prayer. Ned rose, and his leg was almost no weight at all, and that told him how heavy it truly was. He took up ice and went out to meet the day which had an appetite. They kept to an uneasy truce for 3 days that felt like being a mouse under a cat's paw while the cat pretended not to see it. The faith kept the great September as if it were a fortress made of prayers. The city circled it, licking its lips. The Red Keep watched from above with red eyes. Twice more Janos Slint tested the city's fist and found it closed. Once a band of Sellswords tried to make themselves important by bullying the Street of Flower. Thuras and his sword, unloved by the High Septon and adored by the bakers, convinced them to sell their loyalty cheaper elsewhere. Loras Tyrell took Renly to the river at dusk to sit by the water and watch it go where it wished and not be stopped. Balon Swan slept 4 hours each night and spent the rest in motion, learning streets that never settled in their own minds. Ser Barristan Selmy stood at Ned's shoulder, a presence like a vow. On the 4th day, a rider came out from the Red Keep under a white flag. He had Pycelle's livery on his sleeve and sweat on his lip. He bore a request from the Queen for a parley at the Sept steps. For the sake of peace. Ned agreed because not agreeing would have been a kind of war in itself. Cersei came with a smaller company than before. Enough white cloaks to write a short story, not a book. Joffrey was not at her side. That told Ned that she had learned at least one thing. She had not worn gold today. She had chosen Lannister red and a color too timid to be called pink. You have shamed the crown, she said without preamble. You have overturned the city and made a spectacle of the faith and set us all at each other's throats. For what, Lord Stark? For the emptiness of your honor? We shall all drown in it. For the realm, Ned said. The words tasted like winter bread, not sweet, necessary. For the law. Law, Cersei said. If law were a sword, you would wield it poorly. If it were a wand, you would have snapped it. If it were a crown. It is none of those, Ned said. It is the stones we walk on. We may prefer mud, but stone holds. You speak like a mason, Cersei said. You should have been one. You are not made for courts. She looked past him toward the Sept's doors and the benches crowded with God's wives. Release my son to me. We will go to Casterly Rock. The realm will have your precious Stannis and his justices and his taxes and his sour looks. Let us go and leave you to your stone. Ned felt how easy it would be to say yes and make a peace that would last for a season, perhaps 2. He saw Tywin Lannister's face when news of his grandchildren's disgrace reached him, and the country upon which that face would fall. No, he said. Joffrey will remain in the city, under the faith's guard, until the new king comes to claim the throne. You think Stannis will not cut his head off? Cersei asked, and the way her mouth trembled on the words told him that this was not strategic but true. I think Stannis will uphold the law, Ned said, which is a colder thing. You mistake men for law, Cersei said. We are flesh, Stark. Flesh. We rot and love, and both beget monsters. Your northern gods did not make you for this. My gods made me to do my duty, Ned said. And yours? Cersei laughed once, a short bark. Mine made me to endure men's duties, and to undo them. There was no bargain there. There had never been one. They parted with courtesy that cut like paper. After that, the waits lengthened and the nerves frayed, and the news from the Riverlands began to arrive. Footprints that burned, farm boys nailed to doors, smoke that did not clear for days. Gregor Clegane was doing his lord's will with more enthusiasm than most men bring to bread. War was not coming. It was here, and the city heard its feet on the stones and did not like to think where they led. Stannis will not hurry, Renly said in a tone that suggested both envy and contempt. He will come at the speed of a sermon. He will come at the speed of law, Ned said. Law moves slower than men die, Renly replied. He put his fingers lightly on Loras's wrist. Loras's smile was fierce and young and so completely true that Ned had to look away. That evening, under a sky the color of armor left in rain, a ship came in from Dragonstone, and with it a letter that said Stannis had proclaimed himself king by right of Robert's death and Joffrey's bastardy, that he thanked Lord Eddard Stark for his steadfastness and would proceed to King's Landing with such force as honor and prudence required. He wished the Hand to keep the city's peace intact until his arrival, and to remember that mercy was a luxury and justice a necessity. Ned read the letter twice, 3 times, and felt the shape of the future harden like molten iron in a mold. He called the small council to the sept, such as it was now. Littlefinger came with his mask of amusement, Varys with his patient hands. Pycelle wheezed and read from old scrolls when he was not asked. Renly stood and formed an island of green with Loras at his edge. Balon Swan stood behind Ned's shoulder like a standard that had decided to be a man. Barristan sat at the far end of the table, apart from all of them with his back very straight. Stannis comes, Ned said. We will hold the city. Will we? Littlefinger asked softly. And with what? Sugar and vows. He plucked a plum from a dish and rolled it between his fingers without eating. The Queen's allies multiply when we look away and divide when we look at them. She will try the gates. She will try your guards. She will try your belly. Have you considered that she may try your children? My children are in the north, Ned said, and the room went quiet in a way he disliked. He thought of Sansa and the Red Keep's red corridors. My daughters are safe. One in the hands of the Night's Watch. One. He tasted the lie before he spoke it and spat it out. One not. Varys steepled his fingers. The Queen is proud, he said. She would rather break than beg. She will not send you hostage terms. She will threaten and seek to make you overplay your hand. Perhaps she will lure you to a corner. Perhaps she will dress someone else in your daughter's smile and stand them where an arrow will find them. I do not know. I only know the taste of a woman who has decided to be desperate. Then we must be prepared for desperate things, Ned said. The desperate thing came the next morning. It came as a girl in a serving dress with flour on her hands and a basket balanced on her hip. She brought bread for the gods' wives and news for the Hand. She had seen Sansa Stark on a balcony high in the Red Keep, a white piece on a red board, and had heard the Queen say, "We will trade you for the city." Ned tasted steel in his mouth that was not from any blade. Sansa is not for trade, he said. Nothing is not for trade, Littlefinger murmured. That is what trade is. Then we will make the cost impossible, Ned said. He took 100 men to the Red Keep's outer gate and stood beneath its murder holes with his cane in his hand and ice strapped across his back. He called for Cersei Lannister in a voice that had set men to steady their spears on a dozen winter mornings when wildlings had been a rumor more than a threat. Cersei came to the gate's inner arch, high above him, with her hair loose and her hands on the stone. Sansa came with her, pale, with eyes like blue ice and hands that trembled where she held them clasped. Joffrey was not there. Janos Slynt was. So was Mandon Moore, his mouth cut and healing poorly, and Aerys Oakheart with his arm bound. The Hound stood behind and to the side, his helm under his arm again. His face was turned away from the sun. It made the shadows of his scars stronger. "You will open the gates," Ned said. "You will bring the girl down to me." Cersei leaned on the stone and smiled down. "Come and fetch her," she said. "Let us see how many steps you can climb on that pretty leg of yours before my archers carve you new ones." Ned felt the city behind him like a thing with a breath and a heartbeat. He had made a ring and the gods had answered. He had made a fist and the city had closed it when he asked. He could not now ask the city to bleed itself on the Red Keep's teeth for love of a girl it had never seen, and he would not. He lowered his cane very slightly. "You will bring her to the sept at midday," he said. "You will present yourself before the seven, and you will kneel, and you will beg their mercy for the sins you have set upon the realm. You will place your son in the High Septon's hand. In exchange, I will send you to Casterly Rock under honorable guard with such household as you name. You will live out your days in comfort and see your grandchildren who are not children of sin. The realm will make its peace. That is my trade." Cersei laughed softly. "And if I do not?" "Then we will starve you," Ned said. "And when starvation does not move you, we will burn your ships in the river and pull your wells dry and wall your doors so that your screams stay with you. And then we will come in. I will not throw men's lives away to take your stones. I will let thirst do it. Do you know how thirst kills?" "I do. It makes men brittle. You will crack first, I think." Cersei's smile thinned. "You have learned something, Stark." He had learned, and he did not like what it made of him. He turned away under the murder holes. The hound's eyes found him as he moved, and there was something in them that was not laughter and not hatred. It looked almost like a question. At midday the gates did not open. At dusk they did not. The Red Keep drank lantern light and held its breath. The city did not cheer. It waited. The river slid past, making a sound like breath under bedsheets. Men began to whisper that the Queen had sent riders by night, that Tywin Lannister was coming on the river with a fleet of golden ships, that wildfire had been poured into the gutters, that dragons slept under the sept stones. Men whispered a great many things when they were afraid and the moon would not rise fast enough. When the moon did rise, it found the Red Keep's gates open. A single litter came out. No guards walked with it. A white cloth hung from each corner and moved once in the night breeze and then not again. Ned did not move until it reached the square before the sept, until its bearers, pale and sweating, set it down. He did not lift the cloth until the High Septon staggered forward and tried to hold his hand and had to have his fingers pried loose. He did not look until the world forced him.
Sansa les Wizine, 1.
Touched, uncut, and only sleeping, her chest rose and fell. There was a smear of something at her mouth that was not blood. Pycelle had done this, he thought with a clarity that felt like iron pressed to skin. Pycelle had brewed a potion from poppy and something else and sent a girl to sleep away her terror. Cersei had sent her because in sending she could make a point that cost her nothing but pride, and pride regrew in her like hair. Ned let out the breath he had not known he held and wanted to laugh until his ribs tore. He did not. He lifted his daughter himself and carried her up the steps, and the city made a sound he would hear in his dreams. They kept Sansa in a chamber behind the sept with the gods' wives and an old woman who had delivered 36 babies and seen 6 men die from the shame of it. When Sansa woke, she cried because the world was not what it had been. Ned sat with her and learned again that a father's lies are for children, and then he spoke the truth to her in a voice that had cut ice and now had to cut softer things. He told her what had happened and what would, and he told her that she would go north when the next good wind came with an escort that would not be bought. She cried and nodded and did not understand. He kissed her hair and left. On the 7th day after the trial by 7, Stannis Baratheon's sails were sighted on the horizon like a row of dull teeth. The city breathed out and in. The gold cloaks squared themselves. The Red Keep's gates closed again, and the Queen stood at her highest window and watched the sea. Renly put on a mantle of green and smiled a smile that had no warmth in it. Loras buckled his sword belt and kept his face blank, which was new for him and did not suit him. Barristan Selmy's hand closed around the hilt of his sword and rested there, as if he had always known the shape of this day and only been waiting for it to show itself. Ned stood on the steps of the sept with the high septon at his elbow and the city arrayed before him like a quilt. Rag and silk, wine stain and gold thread, all sewn into one thing that could warm or smother. He felt the wind off the Blackwater on his face, and for a moment it was the wind through the heart of the north, and he tasted snow and heard leaves. He set his hand on ice and did not know whether he meant to take it up or simply to keep the old iron near. He watched the sails grow. He listened to the bells. He waited for the law to come wearing flesh and salt. When Stannis came ashore, he did not bow and he did not smile. He acknowledged the high septon with a nod that was only just not a bow, and the city with a glance that took its measure and found it insufficient. He looked at Ned, and what he saw there made a line appear between his brows. "Lord Stark," he said. "Your Grace," Ned answered, and felt the day settle around them like a helm. "We have a queen behind walls," Stannis said without greeting, as if they had been speaking in their letters and would continue the line now. "We have a boy who is not a king. We have a city that has been taught to think itself a court." He looked at the September. "We have gods who have been made to choose sides. The gods chose." The high septon huffed, trying to retrieve something of his authority. Stannis did not look at him again. "We will take the Red Keep," Stannis said. "We will do it with rope and patience and law, not with fire. We will starve them and take them down step by step. When hunger unmans them, we will open the gates. The queen will go to Casterly Rock as the Lord Stark has offered. The boy will live and be unmarriageable. The realm will have a king whom law has set over them. The small council will be remade. The city watch will answer to its commander and to the hand, and not to the purses of whores and imbeciles. There will be order. There will be justice." "Justice," Renly said softly. "The king loves that word." "The king loves the law," Stannis said without looking at him. "The law loves neither of us." "And the gods?" Loras asked with a lightness that cut. "The gods," Stannis said, "love to see men keep their words." Ned found himself smiling then, inwardly and only for a moment. It felt like a man in winter turning his back to the wind and finding a wall. They laid the siege in a way that would have made Davos Seaworth nod and Tywin Lannister chew his meat more slowly. They brought lines of men to the gates and lines of bread to the men and lines of water to the bread. They placed the city between the Sept and the Red Keep, a ring within a ring, and let it feel its own weight. The queen tried 3 sallies in the night and lost a dozen good men and twice that in courage. She sent emissaries and threats and women in tears. She sent, finally, a chest of gold and a letter that promised a thing which made Ned's jaw set. He burned the letter unread in the plaza, and the city watched the writing curl and blacken, and cheered because it wished to feel that it had done something noble. Took 11 days. On the 12th, the Red Keep's wells ran dry. On the 13th, the queen sent out 2 boys with a white flag and empty buckets. On the 14th, Mandon Moore came with a bandage over his mouth and a desire in his eyes to kill all the nobles and start again. On the 15th, there was no sally and no message. On the 16th at dawn, the gates opened and Cersei Lannister came out in red with her hair bound and walked to the sept with her son beside her. Pale and thin and holding to his dignity like a drowning man to a log, she knelt on the stones. She did not tremble. The gods judge. The high septon began again, and Stannis lifted a hand and he faltered. "The king," the fat man said instead, reluctantly. "I am not the king," Joffrey said. He said it like a child repeating a lesson, and when the words were done he swallowed something that had not been food. "I am Joffrey of House Baratheon and House Lannister. I am the queen's son." He looked at his mother then, and there was something in that look that Ned did not like to see the shape of. Cersei stood, her face held. Only her eyes showed the work of the days. She turned to Stannis. "You have your law," she said. "Now govern." Stannis did. The days that followed were not the end of anything, but they were the end of this beginning. The city took breath again and remembered to spend coin. The gold cloaks remembered that there were men under their cloaks who needed meat. The faith wrapped itself in its authority and shook crumbs from its lap. Ser Barristan took his place behind the king's chair as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and his white cloak looked whiter than it had in years. Renly left in the night with Loras and a coil of green serpents disguised as banners. The day after rumors of a new crown began to move in the streets like mice. Littlefinger smiled and balanced books that refused to be balanced. Varys poured tea and information in the same measure and never spilled either. Sansa departed for the north on a ship with more guards than sailors. She stood on the deck and watched the city slide away and found that she could not make her heart decide whether to hate it or love it for what it had taught her. Ned stood once again in the plaza where the chalk lines had been washed away by rain and footsteps. The marble showed only faint scars where swords had slipped and bit. He put his hand flat on the stone, and it was warm in the autumn sun. He thought of the day when he had set ice before the sept and asked the gods to look, and saw them look back through men's eyes and steel's temper. He thought of his children and of the north, and of the truth that had almost devoured them and had been made to feed the realm instead. "You dared them," Barristan said at his shoulder, voice as level as calm water, "and the gods took the dare." "I dared them to do what men should have done without them," Ned said. "I do not know if that is piety." "It is justice," Barristan said. "Sometimes the gods are only a name we give to the justice we are brave enough to see." Ned looked up at the 7 statues and their stone mouths and stone eyes and wondered at the shape of bravery. He had seen it in boys and in old men, in a queen's decision to kneel, and in a Sellsword's decision to run, and in a knight who set aside a cloak he had worn for half his life because the truth had grown too large for it. He had seen it in a girl's face when she went into the night on a road that would not be kind. He had seen it in himself, he supposed, although that felt like boast, and he did not like to speak that way even inside his own skull. The bells sounded the hour. He rose and took ice up and felt the weight of it, and his leg gave its old complaint, and he accepted it. He walked down the steps and into the city that had learned a new way to live for a little while. The wind from the river found his face and lifted the hair at his temple, tasted like salt and smoke and the promise of cold. He breathed it in and made of it something he could carry, and the day went forward as days do, without waiting for men to decide whether to love them.